This is the story of Asaba, October 7th, 1967, and what happened when a town tried to survive by dancing. To understand what happened in Asaba, you have to understand what Asaba was all about. Asaba sits on the western bank of the river Niger, the gateway between the Midwest and the east of Nigeria, a town of traders, teachers, civil servants, and community leaders. A deeply educated and a deeply proud community. The people of Asaba are Igbo, but the difference here is that Asaba was not part of Biafra. When Lieutenant Odumegwu Ojukwu declared the secession of the Republic of Biafra in May 1967, he drew a line east of the Niger. Asaba was west of that line. Asaba was part of the Midwest region, officially still Nigeria Federal Territory. The people of Asaba were not Biafran soldiers. They were not rebels. They were Nigerian civilians, but they were Igbo. And in the chaos of that war, that difference would not save them. By August 1967, just 3 months into the war, Biafran forces made a bold, unexpected move. They crossed the Niger and pushed into the Midwest, briefly seizing territories, including the Benin City, for many in the federal government and in the army. This was not just a military advance, it was an humiliation. The federal response was so fast and furious. The Nigerian Army 2nd Infantry Division, under the command of Murtala Muhammad, was tasked with recapturing the Midwest and pushing east towards Biafra. By early October 1967, the Biafran forces were retreating and the federal troops were advancing, and they were very, very angry. Survival accounts and researchers who studied this period described a 2nd division that was undisciplined, brutalized by weeks of combat, and consumed by ethnic hatred that had been building since the pogroms of 1966. This was when thousands of Igbo people were killed across northern Nigeria. As the troops moved through Igbo communities in the Midwest, incidents of violence against citizens had already been reported. The people of Asaba knew the soldiers were coming. What they didn't know or could not have imagined was what those soldiers would do. By October 7th, 1967, the federal troops entered Asaba. The town leaders and elders made a decision that made perfect sense but will end in catastrophe. Their plan was to welcome the soldiers. They will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that they were not Biafrans, that they were not rebels, nor were they a threat. They will demonstrate their loyalty to Nigeria with the most powerful thing they had, which was their culture, their community, and their joy. Men, women, and children, dressed in their finest, they came out into the street dancing and singing. A procession of welcome, hands raised, voice lifted, and flags waving high. One Nigeria, one Nigeria. That was the message. We are with you. We are yours. One survivor, Peter Okonjo, who was a teenager at that time, recalled joining the gathering in the plaza. He remembered noticing that some mothers had dressed their sons in women's clothing. He didn't understand why. Then he began to sense that something was wrong. Another survivor, whose name was Fabian Owizem, was 13 years old. He spent the following days hiding in the sling of his uncle's house. This uncle didn't survive. A woman named Nkwa Obeze was warned by her own brother, a federal soldier, that the troops were planning something very terrible. She and her husband fled with their children into Biafra. When they returned weeks later, most of their relatives were dead, she was told by another woman that some people had been buried alive. At some point, the atmosphere changed. The federal soldiers began separating the crowd, women and small children to one side, men and older boys to another side. Survivor after survivor had described this moment the same way. The crowds were separated. The men were gathered, marched to gathering point, which was a town square, an open ground, and then the shooting began. It started with individual shots, then it escalated into the machine gun firing. Peter Ojukwu, another teenager who survived the incident, was in that group. As the soldiers opened fire, he collapsed to the ground. He was wedged under the bodies of other people. He lay there, silent still, until the shooting stopped. He survived by pretending to be dead. Others were not so fortunate. Fathers, sons, brothers, uncles, elders, community leaders, teachers, traders, young men who had barely begun their lives. In a single afternoon, hundreds were killed. Estimates range from several hundred to nearly 1,000 men and boys dead in Asaba alone. Their bodies were left in the street. Some were collected by grieving women and buried by hand. Others were thrown into mass graves. After the massacre, the killing did not simply stop. Survivor accounts and relief agency describe what came next. Soldiers started looting homes. Women and girls were assaulted and adopted. Asaba was reduced to a ghost town. Its remaining inhabitants either fled to refugee camps for the rest of the war. And then came a different kind of silencing. The Nigerian federal government has tried everything to suppress this story. The international media, carefully managed, reported almost nothing. Even Britain, which had been supplying the Nigerian government with arms, did nothing to raise the alarm. According to researchers Baird and Oniteli, who spent years reconstructing this event with survivors, the news of the Asaba Massacre was deliberately buried. In later accounts, when it was mentioned at all, it was usually dismissed as unverified or framed as an unfortunate aberration of war. For decades, Asaba carried its wound in silence. It wasn't until 2001, 34 years later, that some survivors who were able to testify before Nigeria's Human Rights Violation Investigation Commission, which was the Oputa panel, convened by President Olusegun Obasanjo. And it wasn't until 2017, 50 years after the massacre, that the community held a major public commemoration with the launch of the first comprehensive book on that particular incident, titled The Asaba Massacre, The Trauma, Memory, and the Nigerian Civil War, by anthropologist S. Elizabeth Bed and historian Fraser Onatali, based on over 100 interviews with survivors, their descendants, and even military figures. 50 years to finally say out loud what happened. Now, here is a part of this story that does not end in 1967. After the massacre, the surviving community faced a profound question. Not just how do we rebuild our homes, but who are we allowed to be? Their men had been targeted because they were Igbo. It didn't matter that they were not Biafrans. It didn't matter that they had come out dancing to show their loyalty. Their ethnicity has been their death sentence. And so, for many in Asaba and in the generations that came after, the Igbo identity became something dangerous, something to distance yourself from, something to fight, suppress, and deny. This is not just unique to Asaba. There is a well-documented psychological response to targeted ethnic violence. Survivors and their children begin to disown the identity that made them a target. You can see this also in the Jewish communities after the Holocaust. You can see it in the Tutsi communities after Rwanda. You can see it in Igbo communities after the Civil War. In Asaba case, it became particularly layered because Asaba was already a community that had historically maintained its own ethnic identity within the broader Igbo world. After the massacre, some leaned into that distinction aggressively. They started saying that they are not Igbo, that they are Anyoma, they are Delta Igbo, and they are different. And in one sense, they are correct. There are some real cultural and linguistic distinctions. But researchers and community members have noted that for many, the denial went beyond cultural nuance. It became a survival logic. If being Igbo gets you killed, then don't be Igbo. That logic passed from parents to children, not always in words, sometimes in silence, in what was never discussed at the dining table. In the careful way grandmothers changed the subject, in the stories never told until now. We are now more than 50 years removed from Asaba, and yet the conversation about Igbo identity, about who counts as Igbo, who claims it, who rejects it, and why, is still alive. In Delta State, in Anambra, and in diaspora, in the comment sections and family gatherings, and also in church halls. Some of that conversation is perfectly legitimate cultural complexity. Nigeria is not a monolith. The Igbo world is not a monolith. Anyoma communities have their own history, their own traditions, and their own pride. But some of it, underneath the surface, is still their fear speaking through them. It is still a grandmother's fear passed down through decades. It is still the echo of machine gun fired in a town square in 1967. And here is what history asks of us in a moment like this. Not to flatten complexity, not to tell people what to call themselves, but to understand why certain identities carry fear, and to ask whether that fear is serving us or controlling us. The people of Asaba did not deserve what happened to them. They came out dancing. They came out in faith and community and hope, and they were massacred for it. Acknowledging that, naming it, learning it, refusing to let it stay buried, is not about opening old wounds for the sake of pain. It is about understanding the shape of the wounds we already carry. Because a wound that is never named cannot be healed. It just gets inherited. And now, every year, on the 7th of October, the people of Asaba gather. They light candles, they call names, they remember the men who came out to dance and never came home. And they do something remarkable. They refuse to be silenced. This video is part of that refusal. And if you learned something today, share it with your friends and families. An history buried is an history repeated. And the people of Asaba have already paid too high a price for the world to forget them. My name is Ayo. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, drop a comment, and if you have a connection to this story, I want to hear it from you in the comment section.